Point after the first down. Could you imagine if
Do I get points per first down pointing?
Yeah, could you imagine if it was some ridiculous league that had metrics like that, where it's like you get points taken away for penalties or things like that?
Oh, I'm out. I'm full out. If that's,
that'd be so funny.
He actually had a great game in full PPR. He had 17 and a half points.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I didn't know where that was coming from, that music. Welcome in, and we appreciate you hanging with us. Not today, of course, just beyond that, the entire season, as we have mixed emotions here. The three of us, myself, Tara, and Matt with you. Mike Awesemo is in the house producing, as it is our final show this season, but we plan on being back, fully comprehensive looks at everything you need to do, start, sits throughout the year next year. But we've also done a lot here. We've definitely built this community up throughout this season, leading into this season, not just the three of us, Lofty, and a bunch of other people here on the Awesemo channel. So most importantly, thank you all out there for being a big part of this. And we're going to have some fun here. It's our last, boss even told us, right? Just go ahead, do whatever the hell you want. There are no rules today. But with all of that said, Tara, week 14 is a gigantic one for a lot of people trying to get into the postseason, including our friend and colleague, Mr. Matt Savoca and the Awesemo.
I hope you get in. I do. My fingers are crossed for you, Matt.
Thank you. I'm right on the bubble. I'm in 6th place right now in the Awesemo C League. Come on, let's go. Had a good game from Claypool last night.
There you go. See,
nice.
Winding down. Is everybody like? Where are both of you? I'm in. This is my only lone season long because I know my limits as far as how much I can spend attention to each and every. Plus, it's the Awesemo Company League, so I figure, all right, I'm in there, and I'm not here to talk about my 11-2 record, Matt. I promise. So no sweat for me. I'm in the postseason, but I'm sure if you're in multiple leagues, that not even for both of you, intelligent, smart analysts, that not every single league is no sweat, right? So outside of this one, the C League, for both of you, Matt, Tara, are you both looking at maybe this week as an important one?
It is, yeah. I've got a couple that I've solidified, and then one that I was not very confident heading in. I think I'm in the 6th seed right now, but in a really, really tough matchup in this analyst league. And I got a good game from KJ Osborne last night. It's very deep. So I went ahead and I started him. And so I'm hoping, I got my fingers crossed because I really want to make it in that one, but the outlook was not good. So think positively about me.
There you go. Well, we'll send it back. Matt has to send that karma back because you threw it out with him that you're rooting for him. So.
Oh yes. Good karma. Well, you can't actively root against other people's teams out loud. Like, that comes right back to you. That's just very basic science.
Very true. Very true. Well, you mentioned Osborne.
Nor would I ever, Tara. Nor would I ever, of course.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But you mentioned Osborne last night, Tara, and I'm just curious, Matt, we can start with you and look at last night as a whole because, I'm rolling with Cousins and just kind of had to eat that one based off my own quarterback comparisons here. Hate playing anybody on a short week unless you kind of have to. But as Tara mentioned, Osborne paying off. We know about Jefferson, of course, in there. What was the big picture takeaway from you kind of last night on both sides, especially with Ben Roethlisberger, and I can't believe the beating he took in the first half for them to even be in that football game in the second half?
I mean, I hate to sound like the dude, but it just made me lean back and go, football is crazy, man. Because that is just the kind of nuts Thursday night game we had last night. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger ends up having one of his best fantasy performances in over a year in a game where they looked completely done after 2 quarters. You got to give credit to the Steelers for actually making this a game after Dalvin Cook just completely destroyed them in the first half. He finishes with over 200 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, essentially is still running at this point if we go to the tape. But, we can talk about that final botched drive, if you will. I think it's a little bit overblown. That's just my take. But ultimately, it's a wild back and forth game that the Steelers let get way out of hand and then ultimately turned into a close one before falling short.
Big takeaway for me was it confirmed my thoughts of I was low-key okay with Ben Roethlisberger as a streamer against this specific defense, and all this did was confirm attack Minnesota's defense. It's woefully bad at this point. From that perspective, just they can't seem to really stop quarterbacks through the air. Maybe they can do it for a little portion of it, but they just kind of lost gas in the second half there. Dalvin Cook, as you mentioned, amazing, just the most testament for start your studs if there ever was one. You can't, I know, unfortunately, there were quite a few people that were a little bit spooked and went ahead and went with Madison, I guess maybe after that whole Darrell Henderson, Sony Michel thing, but you got to start your studs unless you get some big red flag at that point. So that was my big, guys, lesson for the week, always start your studs.
Was there anybody, I'll throw it right back to you, Tara, and then Matt as well. Was there anybody on either side that you thought could be this week into the playoffs as well as we hit that part of the season a sneakier play, taking advantage, let's say, as long as Thielen is out, Conklin, who didn't really kind of live up to that. So was there somebody who disappointed you, both of you, from an expectation standpoint that you thought maybe even in short term, the next week or so, depending on playoff scenarios, you could count on that after last night? Short week, I get it, falling off a little bit.
Yeah, for me, it for sure was Conklin. Unfortunately, he was someone who I thought was going to be a reliable, low end tight end one, and it did not pan out that way. So I think we're kind of looking at this and thinking that Minnesota is not going to shift their game plan. So that kind of leaves Conklin in the exact same place he was, where he might be good in a favorable matchup and randomly get a decent amount of targets. But overall, he's not someone that you maybe want to be aggressively relying on. But despite the fact that it was only 3 of 9 for KJ Osborne, the targets there were incredibly encouraging for me. So on the opposite end, Conklin is the one who I'm thinking, maybe it just is what it is with him at this point.
Yeah, and it wasn't like those 9 targets took away from Justin Jefferson. Jefferson finishes with a whopping 15 targets. So at the very least, Kirk Cousins getting the ball where it's necessary in this offense. And other than Tyler Conklin, Cousins is really the only other player from a fantasy perspective who disappoints here. Deontay Johnson ends up with 10 targets, finishes with 76 yards, and tacks on a 2-point conversion. Najee Harris gets there with over 90 yards rushing and a score. Chase Claypool has over 90 yards receiving on 9 targets. Pat Freiermuth gets in the end zone. And of course, Justin Jefferson does Justin Jefferson things with 79 yards and a score on those 15 targets. So it's all in all a pretty good fantasy day if you leaned on this game. Tara said it. This Vikings defense bad enough that they're creating shootouts in every single game they find themselves in, and their offense is good enough to keep pace.
All right, so let's start to look ahead here on week 14. As always, the injuries, they jump out. We start there with any injury questions that you have as well. Start, sits, hit us up on the chat. Make sure you also, speaking of hitting that thumbs up button, and make sure you're subscribed here season long. And if you want validation of what we, technically the two of them more so than we collectively are doing here, Josh on the chat, 10-3, first place because I watch your videos. Thank you guys. Y'all some wizards. So there you have it. The two wizards up there in between me. Not me, but there you go. Take a bow, Tara and Matt. You helped Josh win some money.
You too. Team effort.
Absolutely.
Nice job.
All right, so let's start. We have what's going out there in Vegas with Waller, and I definitely still think that this is a sneaky spot, getting the 9.5 for the Raiders. 500 team desperation is definitely in the air. We know Derek Carr loves to throw the football. So, Matt, let's start with you as far as just the Raiders, the outlook there with Waller also, and the injury factor with him.
Well, I guess you got to knock down the Raiders' projection overall if Waller isn't in there, but I think they're kind of a league average offense overall in the NFL right now. I know Derek Carr's passing numbers have been inflated, so I think you actually get a little bit of clarity when it comes to how this offensive production should be concentrated if Waller is out. In the passing game, you're definitely going to see Hunter Renfrow highly involved. He's had over 8.2 targets per game over his last 4 games. He's seen 9 targets in 4 of his last 5 games. So I really see a big target floor and target ceiling for Renfrow here. And then in the backfield, you've got Kenyon Drake on IR. So Josh Jacobs suddenly steps into a huge backfield role. He hasn't typically been someone who you can rely on to get targets, but now all of a sudden, Jalen Richard's still on the COVID list. So they're going to have to rely on him out of the backfield. We like concentrated offenses, even if they are middle of the road in terms of production like the Raiders are. Against the Chiefs in a possible shootout, I really like it, and going forward.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I mean, the loss of Waller, it definitely hurts you if you're a fantasy manager that has him and you're trying to pivot. In terms of how it affects the Raiders offense, I think Foster Moreau, again, we look at him as someone who will get in there and maybe get 5 or so targets, fill a role. He'll be running, a lot of routes, playing majority of snaps. But again, you mentioned Kenyon Drake. That's the one that really piques my interest from a fantasy perspective. What that takes away in addition with Waller's targets as well. All things good for Renfrow, but the direction that this is heading for Josh Jacobs is just far too juicy for me to ignore. when we look at him last week, we look at Waller last year. He's somebody who, if he was getting 1 target per game, that was a normal game for him. If he was getting 4, that was a massive target share for him. And now we're looking at him last week going 9 of 9. He's getting those targets and he's showcasing that he has reliable hands. So from that perspective, other than Waller or other than Renfro, the person I'm looking at in this offense, I'm looking at Josh Jacobs as somebody who I think is going to have a nice opportunity here, especially from a PPR perspective, to be very productive through the air.
What about Deshaun? How much value here for him? Understanding that he's not going to be the number 1 target to be thrown, but maybe a lesser version of what we got from Van Jefferson.
So on a targets per route run basis, he's starting to look okay, but Zay Jones and Bryan Edwards are clearly ahead of him in snap share. If you look at the last 3 weeks where, that's the main period of time where Deshaun Jackson has been involved in this offense, Zay Jones is second on the wide receiver core with a 75% average snap share, and Bryan Edwards is right there at 73.5%. Deshaun's all the way down at 43%. So not to say they won't use him on the plays that he's in, but he's still that truly that's that same boom bust player that he's always been. I don't see it as a huge boon for him going forward.
Yeah, from a season-long perspective, I'm still the exact same uncomfortable with him. I don't think it increases his he's not got an increase in target share, really. Just maybe, you're hoping that you can get that one big play, but unfortunately, if you don't, you're left with 1 or 2 fantasy points max.
All right, so let's look at the Giants situation. And the Chargers are dealing with issues on their own end. Mike Williams on the COVID list, and also trying to get through what's going on with Keenan Allen. But with the Giants, it's just an absolute mess. But if the Chargers are down a couple of guys, it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be able to score either. I just don't know. I mean, the easy solution here would be to stay as far away as humanly possible, Tara, right, from everybody on the Giants. But then again, maybe there is some value. Maybe there is some pathway to 14, 17, 21 points. And if that's the case, somebody on here is going to be doing some heavy lifting.
Yeah, in my opinion, the only guy, Saquon, he always can get a certain amount of yards on the ground. He can be productive catching passes out of the backfield. So you kind of know what you're getting there in terms of RB2 production with him. But the guy that I would be keeping my eye out again on now, you can't count on it that he's actually going to play. But if Sterling Shepard, who's been limited at practice all through the week, if for some reason he is able to make it and suit up, that's the guy for me. The concern with Sterling Shepard, it's only his health. It's never will he be able to perform. When he's on the field, he's somebody who is going to be getting you upwards of 8 targets and being very productive with them, a high catch rate, just a PPR wonder, that guy that can get you an easy 20 points. So that's the guy for me that I'm looking at, is the only one who I'd really be tapping on if he does play.
I think there's some possibility that this team actually has Shepard, Barkley, Galladay, and Tony available this week. They all returned to unlimited practice, at least yesterday. I'm not sure we have the practice reports for today just yet. We're recording this at 2 p.m. Eastern on Friday. But if they have that player core in their skill positions, that's enough to at least make this a competitive game. Not to say Mike Glennon is definitely going to do it. I'm just saying that it's absolutely possible against a Chargers defense that has actually been reeling in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Earlier in the season, they were one of the top 5 defenses in the league. They're now all the way down below league average, and they've actually leaned towards a pass funnel recently, but their yards allowed per rush is still above 4.5 yards. This defense is in trouble right now. So I'm not saying the Giants are a great bet, but if you got to plug your nose and play one of these players, if they suit up, I don't actually think it's the worst spot.
Yeah, there's some crazy thought process in the back of my head. And, I don't know how injured Saquon Barkley's ankle is. We know how bad their offensive line is. So that's something that you definitely have to factor in. But let's assume 2 things, right? Matt, you're right that you have a really good shot at a lot of these guys playing. So the wide receiver core, Mike Glennon is on track to play. The wide receiver core is healthy. That gives them a shot to stay in this football game. That gives them a shot to not get blown out, at least, which also means that you can start running the football a little better against one of the league's worst rush defenses. So even if it's not Barkley, and again, this is what's contingent is his ankle and how banged up he is. But would it shock you if Booker had 10 carries for 65 yards and maybe a score in a close game, assuming that the Giants don't get blown out? Maybe not shock you. Would it floor you? That's a better term for you. I mean, does that is that somewhat
it's
computable?
Possible, but not enough where it changes how I'm going to start players. I'm still starting Saquon Barkley. I'm still not starting Devontae Booker in this matchup against the Chargers.
Yeah, I agree. It would have to be an instance of something happens pregame and we get a notice that he's either going to be extremely limited or not, because it's kind of the same deal with him that he has that pass catching upside. So if he's the main guy, I'm good with going with it as an RB2, but if not, not heading that direction.
All right, well, let's look at the other side of it. And Mike Williams is not out by any means and has the pathway to play on Sunday. I don't know what people's situations are. I'm comfortably in a spot with my wideouts where I don't need him to play. And I feel like a lot of people, especially after last week, seeing him perform, probably had him on their bench. So whatever to do with Mike Williams, I think is also contingent on what's going on with Keenan Allen as well, Tara, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, as you said, it's very possible that Mike Williams is going to get that all clear before the game, but it's hard to imagine that Keenan Allen does go. So then you're looking at, are we pivoting to Josh Palmer or Jalen Guyton? And, I don't know if either of those guys are going to be incredibly reliable and something that you want to pivot to when there are other guys that are on other receivers on waivers right now that could be viable options that are a little bit more known in terms of their target share. I think that this really probably just bumps up Eckler more. Again, he's a big pass catcher in that offense. So without Keenan Allen, and we're talking about those short targets that would be vacated with Keenan Allen, I think that's a bump up for Austin Eckler.
By far the most confident in Austin Eckler. If you're talking about a typical season-long league, the only reason I'm picking up Palmer or Guyton is I'm looking at an opponent that I need to beat this week, and they are struggling. Maybe they've got players like Michael Pittman on a bye or something like that, and you know that they might need a player like Jalen Guyton. You pick them up and you stash them on your bench, but I'm not thrilled to play them by any means. The only ones I would say are plug your nose and play options, assuming Williams and Allen are out, Jared Cook and Donald Parham, and in that order too. It's not, they're tight ends. They're tight ends in fantasy football, so the volatility there by nature of the position. But I think you could see 7 or 8 targets for Jared Cook if both those top 2 receivers are out.
So let me throw one more out here. We'll keep it going from the injury standpoint as well. But I'm curious just to look at one that popped up here. It doesn't look like he's in danger of not playing in Devontae Adams with a hamstring injury, but it is something that seems to be nagging, and maybe nagging is the undersell of it as he's played through injury throughout. But it is against the Bears team that is bad to where they don't necessarily need to force feed him to win. So we'll assume that Devontae Adams is playing Matt hurt, as he has been throughout the majority of the season. Does it do anything for anybody else around him, you think, in this offense, just because of the matchup itself?
No. Oh, I should go on.
No, you don't have to.
Look, I just think this offense is so
fine.
centered around Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers. Pretty otherworldly connection. I think he has 10 to 15 target upside, even if he isn't 100%. Obviously, any player can get injured on any play. So if he's healthy enough to go, I'm assuming he's getting a full target share. The numbers have not been as insane as they were last year for Adams, but he's still a top 3 option at his position. So start him with confidence.
So see, I'm on the opposite end. I am now that not on the opposite end on starting him with confidence. Again, I'm start your studs for sure. If he's playing, I'm not pivoting away from that. But I'm comfortable with going with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Again, when we look at him, I guess we maybe forget a little bit because the Packers are coming off the bye week. But if you look at week 11 and 12, he had a total of 19 targets over those 2 weeks. And it's hard to trust him. I know, I get that. I'm a Packers fan. kind of it's one of those situations where you say, okay, I know this guy has talent, he has capabilities, he has breakaway speed, but do I really trust him to be there and make those big plays? And I'm getting more comfortable with it because, you know, we've never had a solid wide receiver 2 to look at in that Green Bay offense and say, man, I really want to start that guy. But the way that he's been getting looks, the way that they've been increasing the pass volume for Aaron Rodgers as well, it's been working. It's been working. If you look at the past 4 or 5 games or so compared to the beginning of the season when they were a little bit less reliant on the pass and a little bit more reliant on the run, they're just doing much better recently. So I don't think they're going to pivot away from it. I'm comfortable with thinking that there's a solid 7 to 10 targets here that MVS could see. And the possibility of maybe Devontae being a little bit limited only increases that for me.
Okay, well, how do I deal with this, Tara? Where I've been working with the 4for4.com on a breakout wide receiver model, and Marcus Valdes-Scantling is popping like no other player right now in our last 3 weeks expected fantasy points metric. I'm seeing exactly what you're seeing. The injury is there for Devontae Adams, and the matchup is good. And yet, how how do I stop myself from just saying I can't put my season on the line and put Marcus Valdes-Scantling in my lineup? I see the opportunity, but I'm scared about it.
Yeah, I get it. I 100% do, but it always comes down to me looking at that other guy that you're looking at, you know, who am I looking at starting him over? If I'm looking at like a Cortland Sutton, maybe, who does have a good matchup, but again, not a good quarterback, very reliable. He's taking a backseat to Jerry Jeudy. I'd be okay with going in the other direction and taking that risk. So yeah, you gotta be risky. It's like you said, you got to convince yourself that it's okay because you've told yourself for a long time, for years now, ever since, the loss of like Jordy Nelson, that you cannot trust anyone outside. Yeah, I'm going back. You can't trust anyone outside of Devontae Adams. But I think I'm getting a little bit more comfortable with being able to push in that direction.
And to be fair, Matt, the metrics back it up. It's just when you say it out loud, you have a problem with it.
Yes.
100%.
Okay. Yes. No, anybody out here who's watching, listening, pay attention to the show understands exactly that, because we've all been in that predicament where it's like, wait a second, I just said it and it doesn't make sense. And yes, it's a internal conflict by all means. All right. So let's keep it moving here. And we talked about Keenan Allen as well with Mike Williams. So Melvin Gordon, we have a couple of more here, especially what's going on with Dallas in that game in the backfield. But let's start, Tara, with you on Melvin Gordon, Matt as well.
Oh, this is such a weird situation because I think we get, sometimes we get a little blinded with what we want versus what will actually be the reality. It's seeming like Melvin Gordon is going to play, and I just don't see any reason that they would suddenly phase him out completely and that just completely hand it over to Javonte Williams. Now, the only thing that's really a benefit here is that we have the perfect game to kind of figure out what this split is going to be moving forward because it's against Detroit. So that makes me a little bit less worried about it because Denver can honestly just say, okay, Teddy, take a back seat, hand the ball off. Javonte and Melvin Gordon are just going to run it down Detroit's throat. And I think that's a very easy possibility there. So I'm good with both of them this week in this matchup, and then we'll see how it is moving forward.
Right. The matchup is good enough. Detroit, and they are touchdown favorites at home. This is good enough where, first of all, if Javonte Williams is the lone back, the way that he's been playing, his elusiveness rating on PFF, number 1 in the NFL, smash start. You obviously have an RB1 when Gordon is out. If Gordon is in, though, I'm assuming a typical workload, which means that the Broncos are probably going to go back to a 50-50 split, which is what they've had, literally 50-50 most of the season here. And I got to say, Melvin Gordon had a pretty funny call out of fantasy football players. He was talking about how well him and Williams just get along personally and professionally. They play well together and they enjoy playing together. But he said that fantasy football has, quote, people in the tight in the rear about him returning to Denver next year. I love it. I love it. Calling us out, Melvin Gordon. I mean, look, the matchup is good enough. I'm probably playing Gordon as a flex play and Williams as a flex play. But man, I just selfishly for my teams that have Williams, kind of would like an RB1, certain RB1 starter for my week before the playoffs. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, this is a tough game. I mean, Detroit's 8-4 ATS. This thing is bumped up to 10 here in PA. Denver, I mean, is Denver really good enough at 6-6 to be a double-digit favorite against any team in the NFL who is what 8-4 this year against the spread? If you just took away the name of the city and the team of Detroit and you saw the numbers play out here, you think it would be crazy that Denver would be favored by 10. I say that all because it's a super low total as well. So this may be, to your point about Teddy taking a back seat, the metrics here from everything from the side to how this thing plays with the total would scream that it's a running game, especially with how this thing plays out. I'm just amazed that Denver's is laying 10 against anybody, let alone a team that's 8-4. ATS at least. Not overall.
Completely agree.
It's a lot of respect to the Broncos, I will say.
I mean, seriously, and they're at the now technically, 6-6. I get it in that division still, but it's not like they're 9-3 coming into this game dominating. Like the Chargers are still hovering around 10 against the Giants, and the Chargers are dealing with multiple injuries, and the Giants are miserable and they don't cover. That's all. All right, that was just my small little diatribe there. Let's keep it moving here from Melvin Gordon. Let's look at what's going on with T. Higgins, especially here in this matchup specifically, because I think it's going to be interesting to look at how this offense, and Matt, we can start with you, how this offense with Cincinnati is going to look pending on what's going on with T. Higgins.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is Jamar Chase gets a bump up, and you probably see a slight bump up for Tyler Boyd. But really, I think that you probably just see more snaps, more routes for Joe Mixon, assuming he's healthy enough to go. I know he missed some practice this week with a non-COVID illness. He had a stinger at the end of last game that looked scarier than it appears to be affecting him going forward. But I really don't have much faith in this Cincinnati offense until I see what Joe Burrow looks like. I thought that hand injury looked bad, and I understand why he wants to play through it. They have a lot to play for here. They're right in the playoff hunt, but I'm concerned about this offense overall, especially if they don't have one of their big play receivers in T. Higgins. I'm not saying it's impossible for them. This is a good game here against San Francisco. We definitely have some shootout potential. Don't get me wrong, but I worry about the volatility of Cincinnati's offense here. I think the upside is still high, even if T. Higgins is out. But the downside for this overall offense is a little bit lower than I thought.
Yeah, this is it's a weird situation because it's an afternoon game. We've got a weird afternoon game, and we've got multiple guys that are questionable right now. So we got to hope that we're getting those early decisions early on before the noon game, so that we don't have to make a pivot within those afternoon games. But for me, it sounds like Joe Burrow sounds like he's throwing normal. You would think there would be some issue, but maybe we're okay there. Joe Mixon sounds like he's going to play too. I think all these guys are probably trending towards playing, and with this matchup, I don't know. It's something that's a little bit up in the air, but it's kind of gets back to a start your stud situation where Burrow is the only one that is maybe questionable because you can find some other streaming options out there, but you got to go with Chase. You got to go with Higgins on the performances that he's been having. You have to go with Mixon. He is a fantastic option as an RB1. So I think you're kind of stuck with going ahead and saying these guys I'm playing regardless of what's happening, except for Burrow, who you can probably pivot away from.
All right, Tara, let's stay with you. We have a couple of start sits here. We'll knock Tony Pollard and then go through our final for the season, 30-plus point performers, sneaky starts. And before we get out of here, we're going to look at a player or two ahead next year that we're really looking forward to. So hit that thumbs up button, please. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed. We continue to build here on the season-long fantasy football channel. And look, that link below, we have two for you here, is for you to use $10 free, just right off the bat at Yahoo. And if you haven't signed up for Yahoo yet, then we still have this deal going for you. Click that link below. You're going to get 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So Michael kicks things off. Tara, Javonte or Chubb?
I probably am going to have to say go with Chubb. Um, I know we're coming off of that fantastic Javonte game and, the matchup, a divisional matchup for Cleveland with Baltimore, but you have to imagine that they kind of right the wrong with Chubb and go back to him and, correct and go run heavy against Baltimore. And again, with Javonte, we've got Melvin Gordon coming back. So I'm gonna go with Chubb, even though I do like Javonte still.
It's Chubb for me as well, unless Melvin Gordon is ruled out. But are you going to know that at that point? So you're probably just putting Chubb in there, leaning on that rule, start your studs.
Matt, Mooney or Judy from Ty?
Mooney or Judy, just looking it up.
This is,
wow.
yeah,
I have them really, really close.
Yeah.
So this comes down to matchup for me.
Right.
I'm gonna pick on the Detroit defense and go with Jerry Jeudy if it's a true toss up like this.
Yeah, for me, I'm also going to go with Judy. Reasoning again, I do think they're going to lean heavy on the run, but if the run game is working, they're progressing the ball. That just kind of opens up that opportunity for the wide receiver one, which is Jerry Jeudy. Mooney, I do still like this week, but again, that's a tough matchup against Green Bay's much improved secondary. And then we've also got Allen Robinson potentially coming back. So we got to see how this all works out with Justin Fields coming back as well. It's just a whole lot right there for Mooney. So I'm going with Judy.
All right.
Actually, that's a great point.
Yeah. Sorry, Matt.
Allen Robinson was just removed from the injury report. I just saw that come across my phone. So, yeah, it's a great point.
Well, that definitely would shade one way for sure. So last one to look at with the injury report here, and that's Tony Pollard, the torn plantar fasciitis, right? And his foot still down to a game time decision here. It's not like there's a great pivot if you had both scenarios here for Ezekiel Elliott. He hasn't dominated by any means, but just Pollard himself, if Pollard is a go, and Tara, let's start here with you and Matt as well. If Pollard is a go, does he kind of factor into the start your stars? As you mentioned, what was the term? You didn't say stars. You said start your studs. Yes. Mm-hmm. Is he a stud? Or is he still somebody that you kind of have to take based on the circumstances around your team?
Yeah, it's more of a circumstances thing with him, unfortunately. The benefit of him is that he's so talented that he can pop off that big play and make it a productive day for him. But outside of that, again, this run game as a whole is struggling. And then when I look at the matchup with Washington, it tilts heavily towards Dak, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, and them. So personally, I'm thinking that the pass game is going to be more of a factor. And even if Pollard is going, I'm a little bit worried and concerned. So I'm probably going to go with sitting him.
Yeah, I think the only argument you could make with playing Zeke is that players who get a lot of volume as 4-point favorites in 48-point total games are usually decent bets. You're playing the correlation game in that standpoint. You're using game theory more so than you're thinking about the player. I completely agree. Elliott has basically been Raiders' Latavius Murray this year. If you look at their efficiency stats, really just an unexciting player who's not getting a lot of work in the passing game. The Washington defense is much more exploitable through the air. And yet, if Pollard is limited or inactive, you got to consider playing a player who's getting that many touches in a likely positive game script.
It is amazing, though, to see those numbers for Zeke, Saquon as well. Remember when those teams drafted those guys in the first round?
Yes.
The Eagles fan in me just stretching out here real quick.
Yeah, all right, click the button on Jalen Reagor 1 year later.
Oh, look. That's fine here. We've all accepted. You can't bat 1,000, Matt. All right, 350 will put you in the Hall of Fame. Come on.
I love it.
That's why first-round picks like your Philly team this year, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll see how many picks they include in a Russell Wilson deal. All right, so last time this season here, it's coming, Mike, I'm sorry. Last time this season, especially with his value so low, that we can do the 30-plus point performers, and we've had a pretty good track record, at least guys coming close. I mean, Miles Sanders actually wasn't too bad last week for me before he gets injured. But I'm curious here. Matt, why don't you start things off? Tara, you'll go. I'll round things up here at the end, and we'll begin with our final season-long show, week 14 here, 30-plus point performers.
Well, I felt a little bit better about touting this player earlier in the day. And then I checked out our main channel, the Awesemo DFS channel, the On the Contrary show with the big boss, Alex Baker, and Rich Rebar from Sharp Football Analysis. And this player is Alex's fade of the week in DFS.
Wow.
Doesn't always make you feel good, but sometimes you got to take a stand. And in this case, I think that Alvin Kamara has 30, 40 point. If I'm getting really crazy, he's done it before, 50-point upside in this game against the Jets. Yes, I know Taysom Hill has mallet finger, and Taysom Hill likes to run. And Taysom Hill, when he was a starter last year, limited Kamara. If you look at those averages, it doesn't look as good as when Drew Brees or Jameis Winston or even Trevor Siemian were at the helm for Alvin Kamara. But I think the sample size is too small to really make any relevant conclusions here. And remember the matchup. They're playing the New York Jets, who, congratulations, New York Jets. In that metric I always talk about, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, you are now 3 times worse than the second worst defense in that metric. Truly an amazing feat. And I think the community in general might be overthinking things. Not saying that Taysom Hill is a bad play. He's not going to take away from Alvin Kamara, especially with Mark Ingram sidelined and all they have. And they don't even have Deontay Harris. He's suspended. So they have no one in the wide receiver core. They don't have Ingram. Tony Jones isn't coming in for, 50% of snaps suddenly. I think he's the 30-plus point scorer by a mile here.
I got to say, real quick, I'm a little surprised that, and look, who am I to go against a bankroll like Alex's, right? So clearly there's something
it's terrifying, right?
Right, absolutely. But I am pretty surprised because they don't have anybody else but Hill to run against a team that you can run anybody against. And oh, by the way, even though they're not throwing a lot, they should be. Like, everything screams Alvin Kamara, Alvin Kamara. So, yeah, I mean, I would say without even hearing ahead of time that this is his fate of the week. If you didn't even preface it with that, Matt, and you just came out and said, hey, Alvin Kamara and all the reasons why, I would still jump in and say, oh, my God, I love that play. I'm just amazed that Alex is fading Kamara that way.
Hey,
I could
made a lot of money off those stands, right?
Look, yes, and nobody's arguing that by any means.
Yeah, I can see the logic, like, strategically in DFS why you would avoid it, but I agree with you. In season long, I think it's a very real possibility he's that 30-point performer. I was a little scared when it was just Ingram that was out, because then I was like, okay, if we're working with Kamara and Ty Montgomery is the more pass catching back. Are they going to relegate Kamara to the ground? I'm like, that concerned me. But with Ty Montgomery out and it just being Tony Jones Jr., I feel more comfortable now that volume is going to be there both on the ground and through the air. So I'm with you on that one. I like it. For me and my 30-plus performer, I'm going a little risky here. But I talked about this guy earlier, and it's risky because when Vegas played Kansas City last year, they were earlier in the season, they were blown out 41-14. And when they get blown out, unfortunately, Josh Jacobs has been phased out of the game. He had 7 carries for 16 yards, but I think that this game is going to be a lot closer because this is a do or die situation for Vegas. I don't think they're going to be out of it. I think it's going to be very competitive. And in a competitive game, a 30-plus point performance from Josh Jacobs is a reality. We're looking at that Kansas City defense that just gave up a huge game to the guy that we have been talking about, Javonte Williams, last week, both on the ground and through the air. We already talked about there being no Kenyon Drake. So there's a risk here that if it gets out of hand, we might see an unfortunate situation where they just pivot away from the ground. But I think it's going to be more competitive, and I'm feeling pretty good when we're talking about Josh Jacobs, solid work on the ground, and then upwards of 8 targets through the air. I like it. He's got 30-plus potential for me.
He's got it. Yeah. The passing workload is everything, right? Because especially when you're talking about full point PPR, which obviously when we're talking 30 points, we mean full point PPR. Yeah, if you get 8 targets on top of that expected rushing volume, just got to be a little bit efficient.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm with
my
you.
Logic.
and I love the Raiders in that game as well. 9.5 on the road. It's a similar scenario we talked about with Denver, that no reason why they should be laying 10 The Chiefs are winning games, but to your point about what they've been giving up and how suspect the offense has been, it's a lot. So let me slide mine in here, and I don't think people should overthink this by any means. And I could see Matt smiling because this is chalk here, and I get that it's chalk. But you know what? It's the last show, all right, across the board. So I'm going to take a liberty or two. And yes, Matt, I'm a hypocrite. All right. If you haven't found that out so far, I've been railing on you for your quasi chalk plays, and this is definitely chalk. But I'm going to make up for it with the sneaky start. I think this is actually a pathway for Stephon Diggs to have even more. I mean, we could be talking about 40 plus points, and that's why I wanted to bring him up, because it's not just getting to 30, which nobody should scoff at. But look, there's a 54-point total on the board. The Bucs are not going to put up 50 points in this game alone. They're going to need some help. We know how difficult it is to run against Tampa Bay. It's not going to be Gabriel Davis going for 10. We'll get to him in a second, for 10, a buck 80 and 3 touchdowns. If there's one guy who can carve up, and look, the Bills do throw the football. It's like every single metric from individual to team, the matchup itself would say that if Josh Allen were simply to throw 25 to 30 times in this game, which may be a lot, I get it, Stephon Diggs is going to be the guy to benefit exponentially. We could be seeing one of these Justin Jefferson last night, Chris Godwin last Sunday scenarios where he has 15 to 17 targets and absolutely explodes. So yes, he's chalk. And to mitigate the chalk, I'll say not 30 plus, 40 plus points. All right. Nice. That mitigates the chalk play, right? Somewhat.
Bold strategy, Cotton.
Yeah. We'll see if it pays off. Yeah.
Last show, man. You got to pull some stops out, right?
I like it. It makes sense because they're for sure not going to run the ball against Tampa Bay. So,
no. And look, it's a super high total. I get it that Vegas isn't always right, but I can't imagine this is going to be 36, 37 points when it's all said and done. 20 or so points lower than the total. It just seems like we should be expecting points in it. That's all I'm saying. All right, a couple of more start sits here. We'll get to our sneaky starts alone as well. Rashad on the chat, flex Kittle or Montgomery, Matt? Let's start with you.
Kittle or David Montgomery? I'm looking at my flex rankings, and hey, if you're in a position where you've got another tight end other than George Kittle, I think Kittle is the flex play here. I have him as a top 30 overall player in full point PPR. Montgomery's not a bad player at all. He's a top 60 player. He's just not at the same projection level as Kittle right now.
It's hard to pivot away from Kittle, but I will go with Montgomery based off the logic that I thought or talked about earlier, with the fact that I don't think Chicago is going to want to throw on that Green Bay secondary. I think they're going to try to aggressively rely on Montgomery. And for as good as Green Bay's defense is against the pass, it has been horrific against the run. So if there's a time for Montgomery to repeat on what he did last week, I think it's this one right here. So I'll probably go with what should be a pretty safe floor for Montgomery and a potentially high ceiling as well.
All right, Tara, let's throw it back here. Brian has a question. We just built off the 30, 40, 50, however aggressive people want to get on their predictions. But Brian, reeling it back just a little bit, and it's to two quarterbacks we've talked about here. Who's safer to get to 20 plus this week? Is it Taysom Hill or Mahomes? Essentially a start sit with those.
Oh. I think it is. Oh man, that's tough. Because it's not difficult to throw on Vegas. So it's not a bad matchup for Mahomes. But again, it's Taysom against the Jets. So I think it's probably going to be Taysom. It's crazy to say that it would be easier for Taysom to get there than Mahomes, but I think it is.
I've got Patrick Mahomes with about a 1.5 point lead in a floor projection here. But they're really close, 9.5 to 8.0 for Taysom Hill. So it's not crazy to lean the other way. Rushing ability often boosts your floor before it boosts your ceiling. So I still think it's one of those situations where I want to put my season on the line with Mahomes against the Raiders than Hill against the Jets if I got to make one call. I'm okay going down if I make that Mahomes call. I'm not sure if I can forgive myself if Hill bombs for some reason, which is always possible, and Mahomes goes off on my bench.
Yeah, it's another one of those where you say it out loud and it's contrary to logic. But at the same time, I do think that with Kamara just coming back, you mentioned, Tara, about Ty Montgomery on COVID. There's a really good chance that the Jets are down 20 some odd points in this second half. I don't think they pull Hill. Kamara could sit. Like we should, and look, that doesn't mean you don't start him, anything along those lines. I'm just saying, in comparison to what we're talking about here, it's not enough. I'm still with you, Matt, but I think that the differential you have in points is enough to give this a second look, especially with the game script of how easy they could be up on the Jets and not have to rely on anybody. Even if it's a couple of quick runs with Hill along those lines, he's not going to be benched or pulled, I should say, because they're up so much. That's all.
That's a good point.
Oh, look, every now and again I save the last show for you. All right. All right. Sneaky start here. Matt, why don't you kick things off, brother?
Hey, so not the biggest injury news here, but I did notice that David Njoku is still on the COVID-19 list, trending towards out, and Harrison Bryant, the other tight end for the Cleveland Browns, is also injured and looking like he's going to miss this week, which means Austin Hooper suddenly looks to have a solidified role here in an offense that needs playmakers. Yes, you got Jarvis Landry running out of the slot and somewhat on the outside this year, and Donovan Peoples-Jones has been volatile but viable in some weeks. And of course, they always lean on the running game, but especially against the Ravens, where this Ravens defense has been selling out to stop the run and has continually been beat up in the secondary. They just lost Marlon Humphrey for the year. They are much more exploitable through the air. So I think that you'll see Baker Mayfield taking shots, and I think Austin Hooper just has a solid target floor here that I didn't expect at the beginning of the week. If you need a tight end punt play, let's say you got Hunter Henry or something like that on a bye, Austin Hooper is a player that I'm confident firing up here against the Ravens. And remember, week 14, I believe, last year, these two teams had a crazy game with over 70 combined points. These two offenses could absolutely put another shootout together here.
Nice. Nice.
I like that one. For me, I'm going to talk about Russell Gage. I'm going to talk about Russell Gage because I think that he's somebody that's been sitting on people's bench. I know he's been sitting on mine, and I'm moving him up to my starting lineup in one league this week. I think we've been a little bit scared to start him because it's been very up and down. When he came back from injury, he came back and he had a decent game with 4 receptions, 67 yards, 1 touchdown, turned around and gave us 0. Absolutely nothing. Turn around. Good game. Turn around. 0. But for the past 3 weeks, he's actually been incredibly consistent to the point where he is actually in PPR, a wide receiver 1. It's really weird. It's hard to believe, but I promise the statistics don't lie. And I think at this point, you kind of maybe have to trust it a little bit because Cordero Patterson has come back. We've seen that this offense, even though they're not really succeeding, they're getting a little bit more consistent in how they're operating. So while I don't think that there's going to be any kind of big improvement, I think that we can rely on a little bit more consistency in terms of target and opportunities for touchdowns as well out of Russell Gage. So if you need a wide receiver with some upside, I would go ahead and plug in Russell Gage to my lineup.
Like it.
He has 1 PPR point less than Cooper Kupp over the last 2 weeks. And it's not like Cooper Kupp's been bad.
No,
Cooper Kupp's had 43.5 PPR points in 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And he's just been sitting on benches and waivers there scoring points. Now that I say this, and it's probably gonna turn around and finally get one of those 0 weeks again. You know how it always turns out, but I'm willing to take the risk with what we've seen over the past several weeks for him.
All right, before we hit a player that we're looking forward to, the 2022 futures, if you will, I think Mike called it the fantasy futures. Let me throw a name out. I'm just curious what you think about it. I'm going to go back to that super high total game and play off of what we saw last week and expect there to still be something similar there in Gabriel Davis, especially because it wasn't like Emmanuel Sanders. Now, I know he's out because of the tragic loss of Demaryius Thomas, so we expect him to be back, but still, I'm going back and using last week as the opposite, I think, of an outlier, but showing under those dire, crazy circumstances of wind and how difficult it is to throw the ball still 30 times in the year, Gabriel Davis getting targets, especially down in that red zone, somebody to look at if we're expecting a heavy volume. If he's throwing 30 times in the wind against that Patriots defense, I should expect 30 attempts minimum against this weak Bucs pass defense. So all of a sudden, Gabriel Davis is a sneakier start, maybe not somebody you rush to. Emmanuel Sanders, again, we expect him, but still not practicing on Friday today. Yeah, what do you think about Davis? Is a nice little sneaky start there in the back end.
I like it. I do. I think, he almost ties into that futures conversation as well, because he's someone that some people, myself included, was hopeful that this might be a year for him to be able to step up, and just the insertion of Emmanuel Sanders really just kind of put him off to the side as that fourth option. But I think he has the capability of stepping up in an absence. So it makes sense to me. I like it.
Yeah, and Dawson Knox too took a little bit away, but at the very least tied for the team lead in end zone targets last week. Saw 33% of the team's red zone targets. That was a team high. So clearly being used where it's most important, near the end zone.
All right, this was your baby here, Matt. So why don't you start? This is going to be the final real thing we have this year. Before that, though, a couple of more start sits, including Chris, who must be down to fumes right here if he's looking for a defense, or he's so confident in where he is in his week that he just has to worry about a defense. Let's hit Rashad, though, first. Jeff Wilson or James Robinson? Tara.
Despite the craziness of Urban Meyer, I'm still going to go with James Robinson on this one and just cross my fingers that he can't be that inept 2 weeks in a row to limit James Robinson and that talent. So I'm still going to go with James Robinson.
Yeah, me too. That was wild, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Possibly inappropriate, definitely wild.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Matt, Chris has a question here. Our own Chris Karen, of course. Chiefs or Cardinals defense?
Chiefs or Cardinals? Oh, man. Let me pull out my rankings here.
I actually don't hate that Chiefs D.
Yeah, I actually have the Chiefs as a top 8 team in my defensive rankings right now.
Okay, there you go. Chris, good luck. Hopefully you can win and get into the playoffs here. So let's do this. Again, Matt, you brought this up right before we began the show. It's a nice way to kind of put a bow on not only what we're doing today, but really across the season. And we appreciate everybody hanging with us. By all means, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe here. We'll have plenty of live content once the seasons pick up next year. And speaking of which, that's a place to start, is identifying a player, maybe chalk, maybe not, that you're looking at next year that you're super excited to get to.
Yeah, so there was a certain Denver running back that got a little bit of airtime already, but that Melvin Gordon comment really got me, dare I say, a little tight in the rear. So I'm going to go in a different direction here, and I'm going to talk about, I'm going to actually tell a tiny story here about a couple years ago when the predecessor to what is now Underdog Fantasy, great site for best ball drafts. Check it out if you haven't already. They had a contest where right at the end of the regular season, you could do best ball drafts for the upcoming year. And I took advantage of that December, January time period to draft in the last round in every single draft I could, a backup quarterback named Patrick Mahomes that particular year. And that particular following season, I won a lot of money off of that decision. So I'm going to try to do the same thing here and take a lot of Trey Lance the moment I'm beginning to draft for 2022, because you don't take a quarterback that high unless you want to see what he does. I literally think it is Super Bowl win or bust for Jimmy Garoppolo in order to stay in San Francisco. And the moment Jimmy Garoppolo leaves town, he is a quarterback one on a weekly basis because of what he can do with his legs. Remember, this is a very, very young prospect. Even with basically a year sitting, he's still just 21 and a half years old. He's going to be a very young first-year starter if he starts next year. And he's already got a 20-point fantasy game under his belt this season. So much upside, and you can get him so late in drafts, so long as Garoppolo is still on that roster. That's my pick for the future.
I love it. Love it.
Very nice. Very nice. For me, For me, I got a little confirmation. I've been on this guy all year. Drafted him in Dynasty before the year started as well, rookie. And, I got a little confirmation at the end of last night's game that this guy is someone that the Steelers can rely on in the future moving forward to be that guy that they look to when they need to get a win. Pat Firemouth for me. He caught the ball. There was a great defensive play, but the fact that they looked at him to that final play at the end of last night's game to try and get that victory, when you've got so many talented options on that offense, it said a lot to me. And if you look at him, unfortunately for Kyle Pitts, it's been a rough year just for circumstances of the team as a whole. But when you look at Pat Firemouth, he has really come together as that tight end, that rookie tight end that we really didn't expect. On the year, throughout the entire year, he is tight end 13 in PPR, which is wild that he is almost a tight end 1, considering the fact that he started off the year really not with a high snap count, still splitting time with Ebron. And when you look at him over the past latter half of the season, he is actually tight end 4 on the year in terms of total points, which is wild if you think about that. He's been getting targets, he's been getting key looks in the end zone. I think the future is just so bright for him. So when I'm looking to a tight end that I'm looking to draft in Dynasty, I want to target him. When I'm coming into redraft next year, he's a guy who I can trust as a tight end 1 and feel comfortable with going with, and maybe fading some of those top guys and taking the upside of him. So I'm looking forward to the future of Pat Firemouth.
Nice.
Gosh, we got to hope they figure out the quarterback situation, right?
Very
Because
true.
they don't have it
Very
figured
true.
out long term.
That is very true.
Very true.
Definitely not long term or short term, even next year, because it's not going to be this guy here. All right, I'll leave you with this thought. We have one quick start sit here at the end, but for me, it's a guy that I think people are aware of, but I'm curious in a deep position where he is next year in drafts, and if he falls to where you can take advantage of it. Anytime you have a beautiful flower growing through the thick concrete shitstorm that's the New York Jets offense, and Elijah Moore can be productive week in and week out, I am curious because I think it's going to be out of sight, out of mind. And he could slip in some of these drafts next year, no matter who the quarterback situation with Zach Wilson, blocking for him, protecting him. The running backs are there. We've seen, 20 plus 2 of the last 3. Even in down weeks, he's heavily targeted. So I think of Moore as a guy that I'm going to keep an eye on looking forward.
For sure, 100%.
All my dynasty teams are just sending out the best vibes that what you just said comes true, because I think Moore has top 12 overall wide receiver upside. I know that's bold, but he's that talented.
Look, we didn't even talk about these ahead of time, so I feel even better about mine. All right, we appreciate everybody really for hanging with us all year. We'll be back as the season gets kicked up and going next year with some live shows, but there'll be plenty of video on demand. There'll be plenty of content, so you want to make sure you're subscribed here through the playoffs, through the offseason, into next year. Tara, Matt, at It's Tara Time, at Draftaholic. So make sure you're following, keeping up with everything that they're doing as well. Awesemo and Beyond at Shander Show for me. Mike Awesemo producing. Thanks to Chris as well, who was producing a lot and heavy lifting on this channel, and everybody else who did a lot of live content. Lofty on Mondays. We appreciate you all out there. Anything you guys want to say on the way out?
It's just been great, guys. Fantastic year with you.
Yeah. We're just so thankful that you guys are hanging out with us. Couldn't do this show without you. Thank you again for being here.
Good luck. Win some money. We'll see you soon.